Hey, awesome people. Welcome to another episode of So Addicts. Hey guys, I'm so excited about this week's tutorial. I know I always say that, but I promise this week I'm super pumped. We are making a circle skirt. Now, what is a circle skirt? A circle skirt is basically a skirt that looks like a circle. You know, when those skirts that you twirl around and they have that kind of flounce and they look kind of like a circle, that's a circle skirt. I know some people call it a flare skirt or a skater skirt, but pretty much whatever term works. That's the skirt we're making in this tutorial. And I tell you, I'm really excited because guess what, guys? You do not need a form or any kind of crazy pattern to do this. I'm going to be showing you guys some tips and tricks and everything and whatever to make this skirt, and it's really easy to put together. I really hope you guys enjoy this tutorial. If you're new to my channel, thank you so much for joining me in another episode of So Addicts. If you haven't hit the red subscribe button already, please make sure to scroll down the bottom of this giant screen to hit down that red subscribe button so you can see more awesome videos from me, and let's just jump right into it. So for our main fabric, you want to get about 2.5 yards of fabric. Now, as you guys can see, my fabric has a rose petal design at the bottom. I'm going to be implementing this a little bit differently, and I'm going to show you guys later on in the video. You also want to get about 1.5 yards of lining. My lining is actually a different color than my main fabric. I had this laying around, so I just figured why not use it instead. So the next thing you want to do is to basically put your fabric on fold. Now, for drafting our circle skirt, we only need 2 measurements, your waist measurement and the measurement of the length of the skirt. Now for your waist measurement, you want to make sure to add 2 inches to your waist measurement. So let's say your waist measurement is 26 inches, you want to add 2 inches to this, making 28 inches. Now when you have your 28-inch measurement, you want to make sure to subtract 1 inch from this for stretch. So your final waist measurement should be about 27 inches. Now when you have this waist measurement, now we're going to go to our drafting table. Now the drafting table has a roll of columns and a roll of all the lengths of your actual waist measurement. Now we're going to go all the way to column 5 because we are actually drafting a full circle. So all the way to column 5, now you want to go all the way to the column length measurement and figure out exactly where your waist measurement is. So for example, for our waist measurement of 27 inches, our waist radius is going to be 4 3/8. So you want to make sure to subtract 1/2 inch from this 4 3/8, giving you a final radius measurement of 3 7/8. So whatever your waist measurement is, figure out exactly what the radius is and subtract 1/2 inch from that measurement to give you your final radius measurement. So now we're actually going to begin the drafting process. So you want to grab your tape measure. Now one pro tip I do have for you guys is to grab a pin or a thumbtack, and we're actually going to be pinning this down on our fabric. So you want to pin that right at the edge of your fold. Now this is going to allow us to move our tape measure freely to create our nice circles. So I'm just going ahead and actually marking my radius waist measurement. Now mine was about 4 1/8 inches, so I'm just going ahead and marking that 4 1/8 inches around the fabric. So whatever your waist measurement is what you want to mark at the top of the fabric. So the next thing we're going to do is to actually measure how long we want our skirt to be. So I'm just going right ahead and measuring how long I want my skirt to be. So depending on the length of your skirt, you can measure that all the way from the edge of the fabric and down. You also want to add a seam allowance. So I measured mine to be 18 inches. My skirt is going to be a little longer because I'm actually going to be adding the rose applique piece at the bottom of the skirt. So it is going to end up looking longer. But if you're not going to be doing that, you want to make sure to actually measure your skirt a little longer or the desired length you want. So after marking this is everything you pretty much need to draft a circle skirt. After this, you want to make sure to add seam allowance at the bottom, just like I said. Add a 1/2 inch seam allowance or 1 inch seam allowance, depending on what you like, and then we're just going to go right ahead and cut this out. So after cutting this out, you want to make sure to actually mark your patterns as well. So I'm going to mark my first pattern as my back. Now, one thing I do for my back is to actually lower it by 1/4 inch. I know you're asking probably why are we lowering this, but we're lowering this because every time you wear a circle skirt, because of how flared it is, sometimes your butt might lift the back of the skirt a little higher than normal. So you want to make sure to just trim that down by 1/4 of an inch so you have that nice laying flat back or flat butt when you put it on your skirt. So we're going to be drafting our front pattern as well. Now for the front pattern, because I did take off 1/4 of an inch at the back, we're going to be adding 1/4 of an inch to our front pattern. So that is pretty much the only thing you really do that changes for the front. After doing this, you want to make sure to actually cut it out as well, just like you did for the back. So now we have both our front pattern and our back pattern. Now, the next thing we're going to do is to actually sew this side seams to side seams. Now, when you're sewing this down, you want to figure out exactly where your zipper is going to go and what your center front is going to be. So the zipper goes on the left side of your hip. So imagine you putting on your skirt. You want to make sure that the zipper is on the left side. So I'm marking 8 inches from the top of my skirt, and we're going to be sewing from that point all the way to the bottom, and we're going to be sewing all the way across on this other side. Now this opening is going to be for a zipper. Now after sewing that down, you want to make sure to repeat the same process for your lining as well. Now, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind when sewing your lining, because I told you we do have to keep a zipper opening at the left side of our main fabric, for your lining, it's going to be the opposite. You want to keep the zipper opening at the right side of the fabric. So as you guys can see, mine is on the other side of my fabric, and the main fabric, the zipper opening is on the other side. We only do this because we're actually going to be flipping our lining inside out. So because we have it inside out, now it's actually going to be on the same side as our main fabric. So we're going to put this right into the main fabric, making sure that left sides are actually matching left side. So the wrong side of the fabric should be matching the wrong side of the main fabric as well. Now when you have this all together, as you guys notice, my line is actually a little longer than my main fabric, just because I'm going to be adding another piece on my main fabric at the bottom, so it really doesn't matter. If you're not adding a piece, your lining should actually be shorter than your main fabric. So now that we have this all figured out, the next thing we're really gonna do is to attach our zipper. Now, it's really easy to attach the zipper. I do have a video showing you extensively how to put in an invisible zipper. So if you wanna check that out, make sure to click that at the end of this video. But in the meantime, I'm just pinning my zipper down and I'm gonna sew this on the sewing machine. So I went ahead and actually attached my zippers, you guys can see, nice and neat. Also make sure to keep pressing when you're sewing. So we're going to go right ahead and actually prep our waistband. So for the waistband measurement, you want to make sure to cut out a 4-inch wide waistband and the length of your original waist measurement plus 3 inches. So if your original waist measurement is 26 inches, you want to cut out 29 inches long waistband and 4 inches wide. So I went ahead and actually pressed this with the iron, folded this neatly in half, and now we're actually going to fold this opposite and put the right sides together, and we're going to sew this down at a 1/2 inch on both sides. On one side, you do want to sew at a corner, going from top to bottom and coming out about 1 inch. But on the other side, you just want to sew this all the way across from top to bottom. So as you guys can see, I do have this corner created coming out about 1 inch, and on the other side, it's just going from top to bottom. So I'm going ahead and actually snipping away excess fabric at the corner, and we're going to be flipping this, bringing out the right sides out. So you want to make sure to just flip this and making sure that it's neat and pressed out neatly as well. You want to make sure to do this for both sides, and then you have your waistband all prepped. Now we're gonna put in our waistband. So for the waistband, you want to make sure that your lining and main fabric are actually matching up really nicely. So in the process of doing that, I just went ahead and actually pinned right at the opening of my zipper. And I just want to make sure that it's actually laying nice and flat. So now we're actually going to put in the waistband. Now, as you guys can see, you want to make sure to put in the waistband is right sides to the right sides of the main fabric. Now, put in the waistband in the terms that the corner of my zipper opening and the corner of my waistband is actually matching up. So we're going to be pinning this all around the waistband to the other side. So when you do this, we're literally going to be pushing all that extra seam allowance into the waistband itself. So you want to make sure to just pin this all around the waist. So when you do get to the other side, this other side is a little bit more tricky. Now we want to make sure that the seam allowance is actually feeding into the waistband. So I'm just going ahead and trimming that corner a little bit so we do have our seam allowance sticking out just a little more. Now we're going to place the edge of our zipper opening and the edge of that seam allowance together, as you guys can see, and this is how we're going to sew this down. So when you do fold this, it should be able to fold in neatly into the waistband. This is just like an optional trick to make sure that everything is laying nice and flat. So now I have this all pinned down, and you guys can see I'm going right ahead and actually stitching this at a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the sewing machine. You do want to make sure to actually just guide this. Do not make sure to stretch anything out. Just guide this on the sewing machine and it should look really, really nice when done. So as you guys can see, I do have both corners matching and everything is looking really, really good. So the next thing we're gonna do is to actually take all that seam allowance and basically just shove it into our waistband. Now, the waistband, we do have a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the bottom as well. So this 1/2 inch seam allowance is also gonna be tucked in, and we're just gonna tuck this in and place this a little bit below the seam line that we have. So that seam we have there, we're placing and folding that seam allowance and pinning it a little below the seam line. So as you guys can see, you want to make sure to do this all around your waistband. I do encourage you to pin and actually press this before you sew it. So after pressing this down, it is laying nice and flat. Now, as you guys can see, the next thing we're going to do is to basically top stitch this right below the seam, as you guys can see, or at the top of the seam. So depending on your preference, you can sew it right below the seam there or a little bit above the seam. The idea is basically to catch the back. As you guys can see, we're going to be sewing this down at the edge or at the top of the seam, and you want to make sure to catch the back as well as you're sewing it. So when you're done, it should look something like this. I do have my seam right below the seam, and I did catch the back of my waistband as well. Now again, like I said, you could sew below or you can sew above the seam. So in the process, I did go ahead and actually finish the hem of my lining as well. This one is super easy. All you got to do is just fold up your hemline twice, and you just want to run that through the sewing machine as easy and as fast as you can. So we're pretty much almost done with our skirt. Now we're just gonna finish up the lining area by the zipper. So by the zipper part, we're gonna go right between the main fabric and the lining, and we're gonna grab these two edges together, and we're just gonna go right ahead and actually sew this together on the sewing machine. So you wanna sew this as close to the zipper as possible. You don't really have to do anything fancy here. You just wanna make sure that the lining is actually laying nice and is holding to the main fabric. So you wanna do this on both sides of the zipper. If you're not comfortable with doing this on the sewing machine, you could also go right ahead and just hand stitch or baste this down. It's also totally fine as well, just as long as the lining is actually laying nice and flat. So at this point, we are relatively just done with our skirt, and as I did mention before, I'm going to actually be attaching the rose petal design at the bottom of my skirt. But if you're not doing that, it's super optional. You just want to make sure to top stitch the edge of the hem of your skirt, just like you did for your lining, and you're pretty much done with the bottom of your skirt. So I did go ahead and actually cut out the rose section from my main fabric, just like this, and I also went ahead and finished up the hem by top stitching it just like we did for the lining. So the next thing we're pretty much gonna do is to attach this row section slash strip thing. We're gonna attach this to the bottom of our hem. So I'm just going ahead and actually starting by the zipper side seams that I have, and I'm attaching this basically at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you want to make sure to just pin this all around the bottom of your skirt, making sure that it's laying nice and flat. You don't want to pull anything or stretch the hem of your actual skirt. So you want to make sure to pin this nice and flat, making sure that it's neat. Now after walking the strip across the hemline, as you guys can see, you do want to make sure to also finish up the seam that's attaching the strips together at the zipper seam. So you want to make sure to sew this down at about a 1/2 inch as well, and when you're done sewing this down, you can basically finish up the hemline. So I did go ahead and attach the strip together, as you guys can see, and when we're done, now we're going to attach the hemline at a 1/2 inch. So once again, when you're sewing this down, you want to make sure that you're not pulling anything. Just make sure to walk your strip into the bottom of the hem, and making sure that you're not pulling anything or stretching the hem out of place. So after sewing this, it should look something like this, all nice and neatly done. Now, last but not the least is actually the closure for our waistband. So I do have a closure that I did want to put into this, but somehow I forgot to buy it from the fabric store. So I did just opt in using this closure instead for the purpose of putting it on and showing you guys how it looked. So I just went ahead and actually stitched this hook and eye down to finish up the waistband. But then I do recommend getting this kind of closure instead. It's sturdier and it's stronger, or you could put a button depending on your preference. So after pretty much doing this, that is the end of your skirt, and it's pretty much ready to wear. So thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Sew Addicts. I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Like I said, it's really easy to draft and put together. You don't need a mannequin or a form or some kind of crazy pattern. You can just literally do it by yourself in a couple of hours. It did take me a couple of hours to put together. So a couple of hours, you can basically have this beautiful skirt all by yourself. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give this video a big thumbs up. If you have any questions, suggestions for me about this video or any of my other videos, please make sure to scroll down and leave me a couple of words or comments. I'm definitely reading those as well. Now, if you do make this skirt, hey, do not forget to tag me on all your lovely photos on Instagram, Facebook, or any of my social media platforms at Dami Adenike-X. I will be looking forward to your photos, by the way. Now, one last thing I want you guys to do. If you haven't already, please make sure to scroll down and hit that red subscribe button to see more awesome videos from me. And I hope to catch you awesome Sew Addicts next week.